Throughout America's history, it is in our darkest moments that heroes rise. On April 18, 1942, 80 men on 16 bombers lifted off the USS Hornet and into legend. December 1941. As Pearl Harbor smoldered, the United States was thrust into war. A war it was wholly unprepared to fight. Across the Pacific, ships were sunk, planes were lost, and the armies surrendered to the advancing Imperial Japanese. Morale among the U.S. military and Americans back home cratered at the real possibility that they could lose the war. 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt told the Joint Chiefs to find a way to strike Japan, to prove to the Imperial Japanese and to Americans that they were not invincible. The mission would not be easy. Many thought it impossible. The Navy's Pacific Fleet was devastated, and Japan's defenses were strong. For American bombers to even reach Japan would take a feat of engineering, to say nothing of getting them home. Only one man could be trusted to plan such a mission: the famed test pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle. Doolittle's plan called for specially outfitted U.S. bombers to be launched from a Navy carrier deep in enemy waters. Flying without fighter escorts, after reaching their targets, they would race to safety in China. His plan in place, Doolittle recruited volunteers for a secret mission that he could only describe as extremely dangerous. Upon being trained and briefed on their mission, each of the men were given a chance to back out. Nobody did. April 18, 1942. Doolittle and his co-pilot, Richard E. Cole, led 16 B-25 bombers as they launched from the deck of USS Hornet. Each of the 80 pilots and crew knew it could be a one-way trip. Not only would they face Japanese defenses, after being spotted, they were forced to launch 200 miles short of their target. Even if they made it to Japan, they would likely run out of fuel before reaching safety in China. All 16 of Doolittle's bombers reached Japan, hitting military targets in Tokyo and other cities. Short on fuel, each of the crews were forced to bail out or crash land their planes along the Chinese coast. One landed in Russia, where its crew was held captive. 3 men died evacuating their planes. 8 were captured by the Japanese. 3 were executed, while 1 died in captivity. The remaining raiders regrouped and made their way to safety in China. Doolittle himself thought the raid a failure. Having caused little damage and losing all 16 bombers, he expected to be court-martialed. Doolittle and his men had no idea that back home, news of their raid had caused a sensation. After months of defeat, America had a win. After months of defeat, there was hope. Stunned by the attack, the Japanese military reorganized its defenses, shifting men and material to defend the home islands. This would have a direct impact 2 months later at the epic Battle of Midway, the decisive American victory that turned the tide of World War II. Jimmy Doolittle was promoted to Brigadier General and awarded the Medal of Honor following his raid on Tokyo. Each of the other 79 raiders were awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. Their story, now legendary, gave hope when their nation needed it most, rallying a generation and inspiring generations since.
On April 18th, 1943, the first anniversary of the Doolittle raid, Jimmy Doolittle gathered his surviving raiders for an impromptu reunion. There, they held a toast for their fallen brothers. 7 died on the raid, another 11 would be killed later in the war. The reunions continued after World War II, and every April 18th, the survivors gathered to raise a toast to those who had passed. For decades, the Raiders saved a bottle of Hennessy cognac from 1896, the year Jimmy Doolittle was born. They vowed to open it only when the last few Raiders survived in one final toast. Several years ago, the few surviving Raiders gathered one final time, and after many decades, opened that bottle of Hennessy, ending a tradition that began 70 years earlier. On April 9th, 2019, the last of the 80 Doolittle Raiders, Lieutenant Colonel Richard E. Cole, Jimmy Doolittle's co-pilot, passed away at the age of 103. The loss of Lieutenant Colonel Cole marks the close of one of the greatest chapters in American history. But it's not the end of their story. For nearly 8 decades, the story of the Doolittle Raiders has inspired Americans of all generations. Their honor, their moral courage, and their willingness to sacrifice. And as in the past, future generations will continue to heed their example, standing ready when they are called upon. To them, and to each of you who have served, we make a solemn promise to live by your example and earn the freedoms you have preserved.
Salute!
A toast to American valor,